The Wealth Mindset Blueprint. Introduction. Wealth is often misunderstood, reduced to numbers on a screen, or the material proof of success that people can touch, measure, and compare. But anyone who has studied the patterns of prosperity, anyone who has watched ordinary people rise into extraordinary achievement, and anyone who has pushed through their own limitations to create a better life knows a deeper truth. Wealth begins in the mind long before it appears in the world. It is first a seed, then a shift, then a series of decisions, and finally a lifestyle that transforms everything it touches. Before money grows in a bank account, it grows in thoughts, beliefs, habits, and decisions that align with a person's true potential. This book begins with a simple but life-changing premise. Wealth is not something you chase, it is something you become. Many people spend their lives running after opportunities, hoping that one day circumstances will shift in their favor. They imagine that a new job, a lucky break, a sudden inspiration, or a generous person will open the door to financial freedom. But external change rarely happens without inner change. People repeat patterns, recreate old limits, sabotage progress, and return to the same outcomes because their mindset has not evolved. A person with a poor mindset could win a fortune and lose it within months, while a person with a wealthy mindset could start with nothing and rise to abundance again and again. This is why across the world we find stories of individuals who began life in difficult circumstances, who had no advantages, no inheritance, no connections, and no access to the resources others take for granted, yet they built powerful, meaningful, and abundant lives. Their secret was not luck, but mindset. Their transformation started inside long before the world noticed it. Developing a wealth mindset does not mean obsessing over money, nor does it imply greed or selfish ambition. Instead, it means learning to think, act, and respond like someone who understands value of time, value of discipline, value of strategy, value of growth, and value of self-belief. A wealth mindset is built on clarity, resilience, vision, and an internal standard that rises above circumstances. It is the understanding that money is not the destination, but a consequence of becoming the kind of person who creates solutions, builds opportunities, and expands possibilities. Thus, this book is not about fast shortcuts or unrealistic promises. It is about reshaping the internal blueprint that determines how a person approaches life, challenges, goals, and opportunities. When the mindset transforms, the outer world eventually follows.
To understand wealth at its deepest level, one must examine the inner narratives that shape behavior. Every person carries a silent dialogue within them, a collection of beliefs formed by childhood experiences, cultural influences, education, successes, failures, and the attitudes of the people around them. These beliefs determine what a person thinks they deserve, what they think is possible, and how much effort they believe is worth investing. Some people grow up learning that money is dangerous, unfair, impossible to earn, or always in the hands of others. Others grow up believing that money can only be earned through struggle or sacrifice. These beliefs act as invisible boundaries, limiting how far a person is willing to go. Changing the wealth mindset requires challenging those internal narratives one by one, replacing limitation with possibility and confusion with clarity. It requires the courage to rewrite personal stories that have defined a person for years, sometimes without them even realizing it. A wealth mindset also requires the ability to think long-term in a world obsessed with the short term. Many people want immediate results. instant gratification and fast rewards. They want success without the process, growth without discomfort, and breakthroughs without consistency. But those who truly achieve wealth understand something essential. Time is a partner, not an enemy. Wealth building is a journey shaped by patience, by strategic decisions, by discipline repeated quietly day after day. It grows in the background, like a seed planted deep in the soil, unseen at first, but evolving quietly. This mindset allows a person to resist distractions, to avoid giving up too early, and to stay committed even when results are not immediately visible. It teaches someone to value progress over perfection and direction over speed. One of the most transformative aspects of the wealth mindset is the ability to see opportunities where others see obstacles. Two people can face the exact same situation, economic uncertainty, job loss, limited resources, and respond in completely different ways. One sees a wall, the other sees a door. One sees a crisis, the other sees a challenge. One sees an ending, the other sees a beginning. This difference in perception often determines the outcome long before action even begins. When a person trains their mind to scan for possibilities instead of limitations, their creativity expands and their confidence strengthens. They become the kind of individual who adapts quickly, learns continuously, and builds solutions that others overlook. This internal shift is one of the most powerful foundations of lasting wealth.
Of course, a wealth mindset is not built on thoughts alone. Thoughts are the beginning, but habits are the engine that moves life forward. Every wealthy individual, regardless of background or field, has daily habits that support their growth. These habits shape how they use their time, how they manage their energy, how they learn new skills, how they handle money, and how they pursue goals. The blueprint of wealth includes routines that strengthen discipline, increase focus, reduce distractions, and create momentum. These habits may look simple on the surface, but their impact over months and years is immense. Small daily actions, repeated consistently, compound into extraordinary results. A person who understands this becomes unstoppable. Yet habits cannot survive without identity. A person who sees themselves as weak will eventually act weakly, even if they try to force strong behavior. A person who sees themselves as capable will eventually rise, even if they stumble many times. The wealth mindset requires a shift in identity, from someone who hopes to someone who builds, from someone who avoids challenges to someone who grows through them, from someone waiting for opportunity to someone creating it. When identity changes, behavior changes automatically. Goals become more achievable because the person pursuing them is no longer the same individual who once doubted or hesitated. This evolution is the true blueprint of transformation. Another essential part of the wealth mindset is emotional resilience. Money and success are deeply connected to emotion: fear, stress, excitement, doubt, confidence, and even guilt. Many people fail not because they lack skill or opportunity, but because they are controlled by fear of failure, fear of judgment, or fear of change. Others collapse under the pressure of obstacles, setbacks, or temporary losses. A wealth mindset builds emotional strength by teaching a person to remain steady, to make decisions with clarity instead of panic, and to view failure not as a final destination, but as a temporary detour. Emotion becomes a guide, not a barrier. This resilience becomes a competitive advantage that sets wealthy thinkers apart from the rest.
The blueprint of wealth also includes an understanding of value creation. Money flows toward value. It follows solutions, skills, creativity, leadership, and innovation. When a person learns to create value through their work, their knowledge, their creativity, or their service, they naturally attract opportunities, partnerships, and income. Instead of thinking, how do I get money? A wealth mindset thinks, how can I increase my value to the world? This simple shift expands possibilities dramatically because value is unlimited, unlike resources. The more value a person creates, the more wealth they can build, not by chance, but by design. This introduction is not meant to teach strategies yet. It is meant to prepare the mind for transformation. Before the blueprint of wealth is applied in real life, before the habits are built, before the financial structures are designed, before the goals are set, a person must understand the truth that every breakthrough begins internally. You cannot design an extraordinary life with an ordinary mindset. You cannot build wealth with beliefs rooted in scarcity. You cannot expect new results with old thinking. The journey begins with awareness, with intention, with the decision to step beyond the limits that have shaped your life until now. This book will guide you step by step, thought by thought, habit by habit, mindset by mindset, into a powerful internal transformation that will change the way you see money, opportunity, success, and your own potential. The Wealth Mindset Blueprint is your map, but you are the builder. The next chapters will take you deeper into the psychology, habits, systems, and principles that shape financial success. They will show you how to think differently, act differently, and believe differently. They will guide you toward the kind of mindset that makes wealth not a dream, but an outcome. But before moving forward, let this truth anchor itself within you. Wealth begins in the mind. Transform the mind, and the path to prosperity becomes not only possible, but inevitable.
Chapter 1. The Inner Architecture of Wealth. Every journey toward wealth, whether financial, personal, or psychological, begins not with a strategy, not with a business model, and not with a clever idea, but with the invisible structure inside the human mind. People often believe that success is built on external advantages, education, connections, resources, or a perfect set of circumstances that align at the right moment. Yet, throughout history, countless stories prove the opposite. People with limited resources have risen to abundance, while others, blessed with countless opportunities, manage to lose everything. The difference between these two outcomes lies not in luck, but in the inner architecture of the mind. Wealth grows where intention, belief, clarity, and discipline work together. Without this foundation, any external achievement is fragile. With it, even the smallest seed of potential can expand into a powerful, sustainable transformation. The first and most essential aspect of this inner architecture is awareness. Every individual walks through life surrounded by thoughts they did not choose, beliefs they inherited without questioning, and patterns of behavior repeated so often that they feel natural, even if they are limiting. Awareness is the key that reveals these patterns, allowing a person to consciously examine the beliefs that have silently shaped their decisions for years. Many people live with hidden fears: fear of failure, fear of success, fear of judgment, that influence their actions without them realizing it. Others carry beliefs about money formed in childhood, such as the idea that wealth is reserved for others, that financial success requires extreme sacrifice, or that abundance is somehow morally suspicious. These beliefs form a blueprint inside the mind, and the person unknowingly builds their life according to it. Awareness interrupts this automatic cycle. It forces the individual to pause, observe, and question. Why do I think this way? Why do I behave this way? Why do I expect so little or fear so much? This process is uncomfortable but necessary, for without awareness, change is impossible. Once awareness emerges, the second part of the inner architecture begins: intentional thinking. Most people believe their thoughts simply appear, as if they have no control over them. But the truth is that thoughts can be trained, shaped, and directed, much like a muscle. A wealth mindset is not something a person is born with. It is developed through deliberate mental conditioning. Intentional thinking means choosing thoughts that empower rather than limit, thoughts that expand possibilities rather than shrink them, thoughts that support growth rather than reinforce fear. For example, a person with a scarcity mindset sees every opportunity as a risk and every challenge as a threat. A person with a wealth mindset sees risk as a potential reward and challenge as a stepping stone. The situation is the same, but the interpretation is different, and interpretation determines action. Over time, intentional thinking changes a person's emotional responses, which then changes their behavior, which ultimately changes their results. This is why the inner architecture must be built carefully. The mind becomes the compass that guides every decision. A crucial component of this architecture is identity, the internal story a person tells themselves about who they are. Identity shapes behavior more powerfully than motivation or desire. A person may want wealth, but if they see themselves as someone who always struggles, someone who cannot succeed, someone unworthy or incapable, their actions will eventually align with that identity, regardless of their goals. Identity is powerful because it acts as the foundation upon which habits and beliefs rest. To change a life, one must often change the identity that has quietly governed every choice. This does not mean pretending to be someone else, but rather uncovering the deeper potential that already exists within. When a person shifts their internal narrative from "I hope I can" to "I am capable and becoming stronger every day," the world responds differently. They begin to make decisions with greater confidence, approach challenges with a stronger mindset, and interpret setbacks as temporary rather than defining. The wealth mindset grows most rapidly when identity aligns with aspiration, when the person becomes the type of individual who naturally attracts, creates, and sustains success.
Another significant part of the inner architecture is emotional mastery. Emotions influence decisions far more than logic. Many financial mistakes are not the result of ignorance, but of emotional reactions. Fear causing someone to avoid opportunities, excitement causing impulsive spending, frustration causing a person to give up too soon. Wealth requires clarity, and clarity requires emotional stability. Emotional mastery does not mean suppressing feelings, but understanding them, observing them, and responding with intention rather than impulse. When a person learns to recognize the difference between an emotional reaction and a rational decision, they begin to make choices with far greater wisdom. This stability becomes essential during moments of uncertainty, when the world feels unpredictable and pressure is high. Those who can regulate their emotions remain consistent, which allows them to stay committed to long-term goals, while others abandon their path at the first sign of difficulty. Emotional mastery becomes a competitive advantage that supports every step of the wealth-building journey. The inner architecture of wealth also depends on clarity. Clarity is the ability to define what one wants, why it matters, and how they plan to achieve it. Many people live without a clear direction, drifting between ideas, desires, and goals that change every time circumstances shift. Without clarity, effort is scattered and inconsistent. With clarity, effort becomes purposeful, focused, and strategic. Clarity allows a person to measure progress, maintain motivation, and filter out distractions. It strengthens discipline because the mind knows exactly what it is working toward.
Clarity transforms vague ambition into a precise mission. This is why individuals who achieve wealth often describe the moment they became clear about their purpose as a turning point. Once clarity enters the mind, the path becomes easier to follow, not because challenges disappear, but because the person becomes more determined and less easily influenced by doubt.
Alongside clarity comes discipline, the structural support that sustains all inner transformation. Discipline is not merely the act of repeating tasks, it is the commitment to consistency, even when motivation fades. Many people begin their journey with enthusiasm, but lose momentum when the excitement wears off. Discipline ensures continuity. It transforms simple habits into powerful routines that compound over time. A disciplined person does not wait for perfect conditions. They act despite discomfort, fatigue, or uncertainty. Discipline distinguishes those who dream from those who achieve. It is the quiet force behind every long-term success, the engine that converts mindset into results. When discipline becomes part of a person's identity, success becomes inevitable because the individual no longer negotiates with excuses or temporary emotions. They move forward regardless of obstacles, and this persistence becomes one of the most reliable builders of wealth. Another key element of the inner architecture is the ability to interpret failure in a constructive way. Failure is unavoidable on the path to wealth, not because one is unprepared or unskilled, but because growth naturally involves trial, error, adaptation, and refinement. What separates successful individuals from everyone else is not the absence of failure, but their relationship with it. Those with a limited mindset view failure as a sign that they are not good enough, that they should stop trying, or that success is unreachable. Those with a wealth mindset see failure as feedback, as information that guides improvement. They understand that each setback is temporary and that every lesson strengthens their next attempt. This perspective allows them to persist longer, adapt faster, and rise after each challenge with greater clarity. Without this mindset, even the most promising opportunities can collapse under the weight of discouragement. With it, every obstacle becomes fuel for progress. Finally, the inner architecture of wealth includes imagination, the creative capacity to envision a future that does not yet exist. Imagination is often dismissed as fantasy, but history demonstrates that every major achievement began in someone's mind as an idea that seemed impossible at first. Wealth requires the ability to think beyond current circumstances, to see possibility where none seems visible, and to imagine solutions, innovations, and paths that have not yet been created. Imagination expands ambition, strengthens belief, and motivates action. It allows a person to design a future that is larger than their past and to build a life that reflects their true potential rather than their current limitations. When imagination combines with discipline, clarity, and emotional mastery, it becomes a force capable of reshaping a person's entire reality.
All these elements, awareness, intentional thinking, identity, emotional mastery, clarity, discipline, resilience, and imagination, form the inner architecture of wealth. Without them, external tools will collapse under pressure. With them, a person becomes capable of building not only financial success, but a life of purpose, confidence, and personal growth. Wealth is not created by luck, nor is it restricted to a chosen few. It is the result of a mindset carefully constructed, strengthened daily, and aligned with a clear vision. Before money can grow externally, the mind must grow internally. Before wealth appears in the world, it must first take shape in thought, belief, and intention. This chapter lays the foundation for everything that follows. The blueprint of wealth begins within the individual, and every external achievement
will reflect the strength of this inner structure. As you continue through the book, each idea, principle, and habit will build upon this internal architecture, guiding you step by step toward a mindset that naturally attracts abundance and transforms potential into reality. Wealth is not a destination, but a reflection of who you become. And the journey begins here, in the quiet, powerful architecture of the mind.
Chapter 2. Breaking the Scarcity Cycle. Every person who has ever struggled with money, doubted their potential, or felt that wealth was always just out of reach, has lived under the influence of a powerful psychological force, the scarcity cycle. This cycle is not about having little. It is about believing that little is all you can ever have. Scarcity is not merely a financial condition, it is a mental environment, a worldview, a quiet set of assumptions that shape daily choices, emotional reactions, and long-term expectations. It affects how a person thinks, what they fear, what they pursue, and what they avoid. And the most difficult part about scarcity is that it often hides inside the mind so deeply that a person might believe it is simply reality rather than a belief. To step into a wealth mindset, one must first confront and break free from this scarcity cycle that has silently directed the course of their life. The scarcity mindset begins forming early in life, often without conscious awareness. A child might grow up hearing conversations filled with fear of bills, fear of debt, fear of unexpected emergencies, fear of losing a job. They might observe adults arguing about expenses or worrying constantly about money. Over time, these moments become internalized. The child learns not only the words, but the emotion behind them, the tension, the stress, the sense that money is always running away, that the world is full of limitations, and that even wanting more is somehow unrealistic or dangerous. As the child grows into adulthood, these impressions become beliefs. Money is hard to get. Opportunities are rare. Failure is common, and success belongs to others. These beliefs feel true because they were absorbed emotionally, not logically. And once they are accepted as truths, they shape how the person behaves, often for decades. The scarcity cycle becomes self-reinforcing because it influences decisions at every level. A person who fears losing money avoids opportunities that could help them grow. A person who believes wealth is for others never tries to create it. A person who expects failure gives up early or never starts. Slowly, their results begin to match their beliefs, and these results seem to confirm that their worldview was correct all along. They say, "See, this is just how life is." But in reality, the limitation began in the mind long before it appeared in the world. Scarcity becomes a mental trap that keeps a person repeating the same patterns, hoping for change but expecting disappointment. Breaking this cycle requires questioning the mental boundaries that have shaped one's life and replacing them with beliefs rooted in possibility rather than fear.
One of the most powerful effects of scarcity is how it shapes a person's view of time. To someone living in scarcity, time is an enemy. They feel rushed, pressured, always behind. They make decisions based on immediate survival rather than long-term growth. They seek instant relief instead of lasting progress. This short-term thinking becomes one of the greatest obstacles to wealth because wealth requires patience, strategy, and consistency. Scarcity thinking pushes a person to choose the comfort of now over the benefit of later. They might overspend to feel good today, even if it harms their future. They might stay in a job that drains them because the alternative feels too uncertain. They might avoid learning new skills because it takes time they believe they cannot afford to invest. As long as the mind is dominated by short-term fear, long-term wealth cannot grow. Time must shift from being an enemy into being an ally, and that shift begins in the mind long before it reaches the calendar. Another way scarcity manifests is through comparison. A person trapped in scarcity constantly measures themselves against others, feeling inferior when others succeed and threatened when others progress. Instead of being inspired, they feel diminished. Instead of learning from those who have achieved wealth, they distance themselves or criticize. Comparison becomes a thief of focus, draining energy that could be used to build something meaningful. Wealth thinkers see other people's success differently. Instead of comparing, they observe, study, learn, and grow. They understand that someone else's success does not reduce their own possibilities. They recognize that abundance expands while scarcity contracts. Breaking the comparison habit is essential because comparison keeps the mind focused on what it lacks instead of what it can build. Scarcity also influences how a person sees themselves. A scarcity thinker feels they must earn their worth through suffering or sacrifice. They believe they must justify every desire, every purchase, every moment of rest. They often feel guilty for wanting more, as if ambition is selfish or dangerous. This internal conflict sabotages their ability to pursue wealth with confidence. They strive, but they hesitate. They dream, but they doubt. They try, but they fear judgment. Wealth requires a mindset that embraces growth without guilt, ambition without apology, and self-worth without external validation. The moment a person begins to see themselves as worthy of abundance, not because of achievements, but simply by virtue of being capable, creative, and committed, the scarcity cycle weakens. Self-worth becomes the soil in which wealth can take root.
At its core, scarcity is a story the mind repeats until it feels like truth. Breaking the scarcity cycle requires rewriting that story. This does not mean ignoring the real challenges a person faces. It means refusing to let those challenges shape one's identity or limit one's vision. It means acknowledging past experiences without allowing them to determine the future. It means choosing to interpret life through a lens of possibility rather than fear. The process of rewriting this internal narrative is not instant. It requires persistence, awareness, and the willingness to challenge beliefs that may have felt true for many years. But once the story begins to change, everything else changes with it. A new story leads to new emotions, which lead to new actions, which lead to new results. One of the most transformative shifts occurs when a person begins to see money not as something scarce, but as something created. Scarcity teaches that money is limited, difficult, and always controlled by others. The wealth mindset understands that money is a reflection of value, action, creativity, and strategy. When a person learns to create value through skills, ideas, effort, or problem solving, they discover that money responds to value. It flows towards solutions, not fears. It grows through contribution, not avoidance. This realization breaks the illusion that money is a fixed resource. It shows a person that their earning potential is not determined by their past, but by their willingness to grow, adapt, and innovate. When the mind shifts from money is limited to value is limitless, a powerful transformation occurs. The person stops chasing money and begins creating it. Another essential part of breaking the scarcity cycle is redefining failure. Scarcity makes failure feel dangerous, humiliating, and permanent. It teaches a person that one mistake can ruin everything, that setbacks are signs to stop, and that attempting something new is too risky. This fear suffocates creativity and prevents growth. To break the scarcity cycle, failure must be reframed as part of progress. Every skill requires practice. Every success requires mistakes. Every breakthrough requires trial and error. When failure becomes a teacher rather than an enemy, resilience replaces fear. Attempts become learning experiences rather than judgments of worth. Suddenly, risks feel manageable, opportunities feel reachable, and challenges feel meaningful. Wealth thinkers do not avoid failure. They navigate through it with clarity and intention. They understand that every attempt brings them closer to mastery.
The scarcity cycle often flourishes in environments where people reinforce each other's fears. A person surrounded by individuals who complain about money, fear change, criticize ambition, or discourage dreams will absorb those influences unconsciously. Breaking the scarcity cycle sometimes requires creating a new environment, one filled with people who think differently, aspire differently, and believe differently. This does not mean abandoning relationships, but expanding one's circle to include voices of growth rather than voices of limitation. When the mind is exposed to new perspectives, new possibilities emerge. Surrounding oneself with people who embody abundance, action, and clarity accelerates the shift toward a wealth mindset, because humans naturally absorb the beliefs of those around them. Environment becomes a quiet sculptor of the mind. Perhaps the most powerful way to break the scarcity cycle is through consistent action. Scarcity thrives on inactivity, hesitation, and fear. When a person takes even small steps toward growth, learning a skill, saving a small amount, beginning a project, exploring an opportunity, the cycle weakens. Action builds confidence, confidence builds momentum, and momentum builds transformation. Each step becomes evidence that change is possible, that progress is real, and that the future can be shaped intentionally. Scarcity cannot survive in a mind that is consistently moving forward, because action requires focus, energy, and belief. With every step, the mind gathers proof that abundance is possible. Breaking the scarcity cycle is not about pretending challenges don't exist. It is about refusing to let them define what is possible. It is about replacing fear with awareness, doubt with intention, hesitation with action, and comparison with growth. Scarcity is a mindset that contracts the world. Abundance is a mindset that expands it. As this chapter draws to a close, one truth becomes clear. Wealth begins when scarcity ends. The blueprint cannot be built on fear. It can only be built on possibility, clarity, and belief. Once the scarcity cycle is broken, the mind becomes free, free to imagine, free to create, free to grow, and free to build a life that reflects potential rather than limitation. This is the foundation upon which the rest of the wealth mindset is built, and once this foundation strengthens, the journey toward abundance becomes not only possible, but unstoppable.
Chapter 3. The Power of Belief and Self-Expectation. Every meaningful transformation begins with belief, for belief is the quiet force that shapes the boundaries of a person's world. It is invisible yet powerful, often determining what someone dares to attempt, what they think they deserve, and how far they are willing to go. When people observe success in others, they often assume that talent, luck, or advantage made the difference. But beneath every visible achievement lies an internal architecture built on belief. Belief in possibility, belief in progress, belief in one's ability to grow beyond current limitations. Wealth, like any form of success, cannot flourish in a mind that doubts its worth or its capacity. It begins with the simple yet profound conviction that change is possible, that growth is attainable, and that one's future is not predetermined by the past. Belief shapes self-expectation, and self-expectation shapes action. A person who believes they are capable expects progress even before they see it. They take steps forward even when results are not immediate. They persist because their belief creates internal certainty, a sense that their efforts carry purpose and direction. On the other hand, a person who doubts themselves expects little from life and receives even less. They attempt half-heartedly, because they assume failure is inevitable. They retreat quickly when challenges arise because they secretly believe they do not possess the strength to overcome them. These expectations influence not only behavior, but identity, forming a self-fulfilling prophecy that reinforces the inner narrative. A person becomes what they expect from themselves, and this truth is as powerful as it is often overlooked.
Breaking this cycle requires confronting the beliefs that govern one's life and questioning whether they reflect truth or conditioning. Many people assume their beliefs are permanent because they feel familiar, but familiarity is not the same as truth. A belief is simply a repeated thought that has gathered emotional weight. Once recognized, it can be changed. The process of changing a belief begins with awareness, noticing the internal dialogue that appears during moments of doubt, ambition, or challenge. Often these thoughts are automatic, shaped by past experiences rather than present potential. Once observed, they can be replaced intentionally with thoughts that support growth rather than limit it. This process is slow, deliberate, and at times uncomfortable, but it is the path toward reshaping the internal blueprint that determines how a person engages with the world. At the heart of belief lies identity, the deep internal sense of who a person thinks they are. Identity is powerful because it silently directs behavior. A person who identifies as capable will behave differently from someone who identifies as limited. A person who sees themselves as resilient will respond differently to challenges compared with someone who sees themselves as fragile. Identity becomes the lens through which life is experienced, and this lens is shaped by belief. To build a wealth mindset, identity must evolve from one defined by scarcity or doubt into one defined by growth, confidence, and possibility. This evolution is not about pretending to be someone else. It is about uncovering the stronger, more capable self that has been buried under years of conditioning, fear, and uncertainty. Belief also influences how a person interprets obstacles. When someone believes they are capable of succeeding, obstacles appear as temporary challenges rather than permanent barriers. They engage with difficulty differently, with curiosity instead of despair, with persistence instead of surrender. This shift in interpretation changes outcomes significantly. Many people fail not because the challenge was too great, but because their belief in their ability was too small. When belief is strong, the mind searches for solutions, adapts quickly, and continues moving forward. When belief is weak, the mind magnifies problems, focuses on limitations, and retreats into avoidance. The external situation may be the same, but the internal reaction determines the result.
Self-expectation, shaped by belief, becomes a powerful force that guides daily behavior. A person who expects excellence puts more care into their actions. A person who expects growth invests in learning. A person who expects progress takes consistent steps, even when motivation fades. Expectations act as a contract between the self and the future, defining what kind of effort one is willing to give and what kind of results one believes are possible. The wealth mindset is built on high self-expectation, not unrealistic perfectionism, but an inner standard that pushes a person toward their potential. This standard is not imposed by the world, but chosen internally, and it becomes the foundation of habits, discipline, and progress. Belief also influences the level of risk a person is willing to take. Risk is unavoidable in the pursuit of growth, but fear magnifies risk until it becomes paralyzing. A wealth thinker understands that risk is part of progress and that belief in oneself reduces the fear of uncertainty. When belief is strong, risk becomes manageable because the person trusts their ability to adapt, learn, and recover. They do not fear mistakes because mistakes do not threaten their identity.
Instead, they inform it. A person with weak belief, however, sees risk as dangerous and overwhelming. They stay in comfort zones that gradually shrink their potential, limiting the life they could have built. Belief transforms risk from something to avoid into something to navigate intelligently. The power of belief is also evident in the way it shapes the mind's relationship with opportunity. Opportunities rarely announce themselves clearly. They often appear disguised as challenges, uncertainty, or work. A person without belief overlooks opportunities because they assume they are not qualified, not ready, or not capable enough. They wait for perfect conditions that never arrive. Meanwhile, a person with strong belief recognizes possibilities even in difficult circumstances. They see potential where others see problems. They take initiative not because they are certain of success, but because they trust themselves enough to try. This willingness to act, driven by belief, often becomes the factor that separates those who grew from those who remain stagnant.
Belief also determines resilience. When a person believes they have the capacity to overcome difficulty, they recover faster from setbacks. They recognize that failure is not a reflection of their identity, but a natural part of progress. This perspective allows them to continue forward even when faced with disappointment or uncertainty. Without belief, failure becomes personal. It becomes a judgment, a confirmation of inadequacy, and a reason to stop trying. Resilience collapses under the weight of doubt. But when belief is strong, resilience becomes a natural extension of identity. The person returns to their goals with even greater clarity because they understand that setbacks refine character and sharpen skill. Another dimension of belief is how it influences the mind's relationship with learning. Wealth thinkers believe in continuous growth. They do not assume they know enough. They remain students of life, constantly seeking knowledge, improvement, and understanding. This belief in growth gives them a significant advantage because learning becomes a lifelong habit rather than an obligation forced by circumstance. The person who believes they can grow learns faster, adapts quicker, and evolves more deeply. Meanwhile, those who believe their abilities are fixed avoid challenges because challenges threaten their fragile sense of self. They avoid learning new skills because they fear feeling inadequate. This mindset prevents them from reaching their potential. Belief in growth opens doors that would otherwise remain invisible. Ultimately, belief becomes the silent architect of destiny. It influences choices, shapes habits, guides emotions, and defines how a person engages with life. Wealth is not created by wishful thinking, but by a foundation of belief that supports consistent action, disciplined effort, and purposeful decisions. Without belief, even the most powerful strategies collapse under hesitation. With belief, even small steps compound into extraordinary outcomes. As this chapter comes to an end, one truth emerges clearly. Belief is not a luxury, it is a requirement. It is the starting point of personal transformation and the engine behind long-term success. To build the wealth mindset, one must cultivate belief with intention, nurture self-expectation with purpose, and evolve identity with courage. The person who believes in their potential begins to see opportunities where they once saw limits. The person who believes in their strength begins to act with confidence where they once hesitated. The person who believes in their ability to grow begins to build a future that reflects their highest possibilities. Belief is the foundation upon which the wealth blueprint stands. And once this foundation is strong, the journey toward abundance becomes not only possible, but unstoppable.
Chapter 4. Rewiring Your Financial Identity. Every transformation in life begins with the evolution of identity. For identity is the internal blueprint that determines what a person believes, how they act, what they tolerate, and what they pursue. It is the silent force shaping choices long before those choices are consciously made. People often attempt to change their habits, their careers, or their financial strategies without realizing that these external changes cannot last if the internal identity remains the same. A person may try to save money, invest, or chase new opportunities, but if they still see themselves as someone who is destined to struggle, someone who never gets ahead, someone who is unlucky or limited, their results will reflect that inner belief no matter how hard they try. Real wealth begins not with money, but with the transformation of how a person sees themselves. Wealth is not only earned, it is embodied. Financial identity is a powerful psychological framework built quietly over years of experiences, memories, conversations, and interpretations. A child who grows up hearing that money is scarce forms an identity shaped by scarcity. Another who grows up witnessing fear around financial decisions forms an identity rooted in caution. Yet another may grow up observing ambition, growth, and confidence, and so they internalize these traits as natural parts of life. Identity rarely comes from conscious choice. It is shaped by observation and repetition. Many people carry identities that do not serve them, identities that were formed in childhood environments that no longer reflect their potential. And yet, without questioning these inherited beliefs, individuals continue acting according to them, never realizing how deeply their financial outcomes are tied to the story they tell themselves about who they are. Rewiring financial identity begins with recognizing that identity is not fixed. It evolves with intention, awareness, and repeated action. Just as a person can strengthen a muscle through consistent training, they can strengthen a new identity through conscious reaffirmation and aligned behavior. The first step toward building a wealth-oriented identity is acknowledging the gap between who one currently is and who they wish to become. This gap is not a weakness, but an invitation. It reveals that growth is possible, that the current identity is not the final one, and that with consistent mental and emotional practice, a new version of the self can emerge, one capable of attracting, sustaining, and managing wealth with clarity and confidence.
A strong financial identity is grounded in self-respect. A person who respects themselves makes different choices about their finances because they see their future as worthy of protection, investment, and care. They do not sabotage their progress to satisfy temporary impulses. They do not internalize failure as personal. They do not accept a life defined by limitation. Instead, they view money not merely as a tool, but as a reflection of their values. When someone believes deeply that they deserve stability, growth, and abundance, they begin to act in ways that support these outcomes. They become intentional about learning, disciplined about spending, strategic about opportunities, and patient with long-term progress. Their identity begins to align with their goals, and this alignment becomes the engine behind transformation. The mind's relationship with responsibility is another key element of financial identity. Individuals trapped in a limited identity often blame external forces for their situation: the economy, the past, their upbringing, or circumstances that feel beyond their control. But while these factors do influence life, they do not determine identity unless one allows them to. To grow into a wealth identity, a person must shift from external blame to internal accountability. Accountability does not mean guilt or self-criticism. It means recognizing that the power to change begins within. It means understanding that while the past shaped the starting point, the future depends on choices made today. Once a person embraces accountability, they stop waiting for circumstances to improve and begin creating improvement through action and intention. This shift in responsibility transforms helplessness into empowerment and passivity into momentum.
A financial identity is also shaped by the mind's tolerance for discomfort. Wealth requires growth, and growth requires stepping outside familiar patterns, which often feels uncomfortable. A person whose identity is tied to comfort avoids risks, avoids learning new skills, and avoids difficult conversations about money. They stay in familiar environments that limit their possibilities. But a person building a wealth identity learns to become comfortable with discomfort. They understand that temporary uncertainty is part of long-term progress. They see discipline not as restriction, but as liberation from impulsive decisions. They view challenges not as threats, but as invitations to expand their capabilities. This shift in tolerance is one of the most important aspects of transformation, because identity thrives not in comfort, but in purposeful struggle, the kind that leads to stronger skills, clearer vision, and deeper resilience.
Another critical element of financial identity is the belief in one's ability to learn. Many people unconsciously limit themselves by believing they are bad with money, not smart enough, or not financially minded. These statements are not truths. They are identities shaped by past failures, lack of exposure, or comparison to others. The truth is that financial skill is learned, not inherited. It grows through practice, understanding, and consistent exposure. A wealth identity embraces learning as a lifelong process. It recognizes that each new skill, saving, budgeting, investing, decision-making, emotional management, is a step toward empowerment. As the person builds competence, belief strengthens, and as belief strengthens, identity transforms. This cycle becomes a powerful force that sustains long-term growth. One of the most transformative aspects of financial identity is the relationship with value, both self-value and the value one creates in the world. Individuals with a limited identity undervalue their abilities, their time, and their potential contributions. They hesitate to pursue opportunities because they fear inadequacy. They accept less than they deserve because they believe that is all they can receive. But as a person rewires their identity toward wealth, they begin to recognize their inherent value. They start treating their time as precious, their energy as limited, and their potential as limitless. They stop settling for opportunities that diminish their growth. They begin seeking ways to expand their skills, contribute meaningfully, and increase the value they bring to others. This shift is powerful because wealth flows naturally toward value. And as a person sees themselves as valuable, they create more value, attract more opportunities, and increase their earning potential. The connection between identity and habits is deep and inseparable. People often try to change habits without changing identity, and this is why the change does not last. Habits reflect identity. A person who sees themselves as financially responsible naturally develops behaviors aligned with responsibility. A person who sees themselves as a builder of wealth naturally develops habits of saving, investing, and planning. A person who sees themselves as someone who always struggles naturally develops habits of avoidance, impulsiveness, and inconsistency. Long-term habit change requires aligning behavior with the identity one wishes to embody. When a person repeatedly acts in a way that reflects the new identity, the mind begins to accept this identity as truth. Over time, the old patterns weaken and the new ones strengthen. This is how internal rewiring becomes permanent, through repeated action that reinforces a chosen identity.
The financial identity also connects closely with emotional patterns. People with a scarcity identity react emotionally to money, fear, guilt, anxiety, or shame. These emotions shape decisions impulsively, leading to patterns that repeat themselves. But a wealth identity is rooted in emotional stability. It allows a person to approach financial decisions calmly, thoughtfully, and strategically. This emotional steadiness becomes a core part of who they are. They no longer panic when faced with challenges. They no longer rush into impulsive choices to soothe discomfort. They no longer allow fear to override logic. Instead, they move through financial life with clarity, patience, and confidence, recognizing that emotions are signals but not instructions. Rewiring financial identity also requires letting go of the inner narratives that no longer serve growth. Many people hold on to stories that reinforce limitation, stories of past mistakes, missed opportunities, failures, or disappointments. These stories become excuses the mind uses to justify stagnation. But these narratives can be rewritten. A wealth identity takes lessons from the past without letting the past define the future. It transforms pain into wisdom, regret into clarity, and failure into direction. It understands that identity is not shaped by what happened before, but by who one chooses to become now. Ultimately, rewiring financial identity is an act of personal liberation. It frees a person from inherited fears, outdated beliefs, and emotional burdens that have limited their potential. It opens the mind to possibilities that once felt out of reach. It transforms a life of reaction into a life of creation. A wealth identity is not defined by the amount of money a person has, but by the clarity, intention, and strength with which they shape their financial journey. It is the identity of someone who believes in their ability to grow, someone who respects their future enough to invest in it, someone who chooses empowerment over fear, and someone who sees wealth not as something external to chase, but as something internal to become. As this chapter ends, one truth becomes clear. The wealth mindset cannot exist without a wealth identity. Identity is the foundation upon which habits, decisions, and opportunities are built. When a person rewires their financial identity, they do more than change their finances, they change their destiny. They step into a version of themselves capable of creating abundance, sustaining growth, and living with purpose. And once this identity takes root, the journey toward wealth becomes not only achievable, but deeply transformative. Chapter 5. The Psychology of Wealth. How Thoughts Shape Reality. Wealth, in its deepest form, is not built from money, strategies, or opportunities, but from the quiet psychological patterns that govern how a person sees the world and responds to it. Behind every financial decision lies a thought, a belief, an interpretation that guides action long before the action is taken. People often assume that wealth is the result of external conditions, a strong economy, a good job, a supportive environment. Yet two individuals can face the same circumstances and produce entirely different outcomes. One sees possibility where the other sees danger. One acts with clarity, while the other hesitates with fear. One invests in growth, while the other retreats into comfort. This difference is not rooted in ability, but in psychology, for the mind shapes reality long before the world does. Understanding the psychology of wealth means recognizing that thoughts are not abstract ideas, but powerful sculptors of destiny, shaping the path a person walks and the future they build. The first psychological force that influences wealth is perception, the way a person interprets the world around them. Perception is not objective. It is filtered through the mind's beliefs, fears, hopes, and expectations. A person who perceives challenges as barriers will retreat when difficulty arises, while someone who perceives challenges as part of growth will move forward with resilience. Both individuals face the same obstacle, yet their internal interpretation creates two separate realities. This is why understanding one's psychological filters is essential. A mind accustomed to scarcity interprets opportunities as risky, change as threatening, and ambition as unrealistic. But a mind oriented toward abundance interprets the same experiences as pathways toward expansion. The world does not change, the interpretation does, and with it, the decisions that shape one's future. Another key psychological element of wealth is focus. The mind can only hold a limited number of thoughts at a time, and those thoughts determine what a person notices, prioritizes, and acts upon. A person focused on fear will see reasons to remain small. A person focused on growth will see reasons to move forward. Attention becomes a form of power. Whatever the mind consistently focuses on expands in emotional weight and influence. When someone focuses on problems, problems grow. When they focus on solutions, possibilities grow. This does not mean ignoring difficulties, but choosing to center attention on what builds progress rather than what reinforces limitation. Wealth thinkers train their focus intentionally, directing their mental energy toward opportunities, learning, discipline, and long-term vision. This focus becomes a psychological anchor that keeps them steady even when uncertainty rises.
The psychology of wealth is also deeply influenced by a person's relationship with uncertainty. The human mind is wired to avoid risk because uncertainty triggers discomfort. Yet every form of growth exists beyond what is known. A person who fears uncertainty will unconsciously sabotage their progress, choosing predictable safety over transformative possibility. They will delay decisions, avoid challenges, and settle for environments that limit their potential. But individuals who understand the psychology of wealth recognize that uncertainty is not the opposite of security, it is the pathway to it. Growth requires embracing the unknown, making decisions without guaranteed outcomes, and trusting the ability to adapt along the way. When the mind learns to coexist with uncertainty rather than resist it, new levels of opportunity reveal themselves, and wealth becomes accessible in ways it never was before. A significant psychological factor shaping wealth is self-talk, the inner dialogue that runs through a person's mind throughout the day. This dialogue is often subconscious, yet it determines emotional responses, decisions, and behavior. Some people speak to themselves with doubt, criticism, or fear, reinforcing beliefs that weaken their confidence. Others speak with encouragement, clarity, and strength, reinforcing beliefs that support growth. This self-talk becomes a mental atmosphere in which identity grows. A negative internal dialogue suffocates ambition. A positive one nurtures it. A wealth mindset is cultivated not only through external actions, but through internal language. When a person chooses to speak to themselves as someone worthy of growth, capable of learning, and deserving of success, their mind begins to shift. Over time, this shift becomes a new psychological baseline that supports stronger decision-making and more courageous action. The psychology of wealth is also shaped by emotional regulation, the ability to observe emotions without being controlled by them. Money triggers strong emotions in many people: fear, excitement, shame, guilt, anxiety, or impulsiveness. These emotions influence choices, often more than logic. A person overwhelmed by fear may avoid investing, even when it is beneficial. Someone overtaken by excitement may spend impulsively. Emotional decisions create cycles that repeat themselves until awareness intervenes. Emotional regulation does not mean suppressing feelings, but managing them intentionally. It means recognizing when fear is distorting perception, when excitement is exaggerating possibilities, when doubt is shrinking ambition. When emotions are acknowledged but not allowed to dictate decisions, clarity emerges. This clarity strengthens patience, discipline, and long-term thinking, all essential psychological pillars of wealth.
Another psychological principle of wealth involves the mind's relationship with habits. Habits are not simply routines, but automated expressions of identity. The mind creates habits to conserve energy, repeating patterns that feel familiar even if they are harmful. A person who grew up in a financial environment rooted in scarcity may unconsciously adopt habits of avoidance, procrastination, overspending, or inconsistent effort. These habits feel natural because they match an internal identity. But the psychology of wealth requires breaking these unconscious patterns through deliberate action. When new habits are practiced consistently, saving small amounts, planning intentionally, learning regularly, the mind gradually rewires itself. The identity shifts. What once felt difficult becomes natural, and what once felt foreign becomes familiar. This psychological shift is slow but powerful, transforming the mind through repetition and intentionality. The mind's perception of progress also influences wealth. Many people believe progress must be dramatic, immediate, or visible to be meaningful. When progress is slow, they grow impatient or discouraged, abandoning their goals before results take root. This impatience stems from a psychological expectation shaped by modern culture, which glorifies instant success while hiding the years of consistent effort behind it. Wealth thinkers understand that progress is often invisible before it becomes undeniable. They recognize that small actions compound quietly, shaping the foundation for future abundance. This psychological patience allows them to stay committed even when results are not yet visible. They trust the process, not because they ignore reality, but because they understand that true change grows beneath the surface, long before it appears in visible form. One of the strongest psychological forces shaping wealth is identity reinforcement, the need for the mind to remain consistent with the story it believes about itself. If a person sees themselves as someone who always struggles, they will unconsciously act in ways that support this identity. If they see themselves as someone capable of opportunity, they will act differently. The mind seeks coherence, and this desire for coherence influences decisions deeply. To build wealth, the internal story must evolve. A person must begin seeing themselves not through the lens of past limitations, but through the lens of future potential. This shift does not happen instantly. It happens through repeated action that contradicts the old identity and reinforces the new one. Over time, the mind accepts this new version as truth, allowing behavior to align naturally with growth.
Another powerful psychological principle involves the mind's relationship with discipline. Many people interpret discipline as restriction, but psychologically, discipline is a form of self-respect. It is the internal acknowledgement that one's future is worth protecting, that temporary discomfort is worth long-term benefit, and that consistency matters more than convenience. Discipline is not a personality trait. It is a psychological decision made repeatedly until it becomes part of identity. When discipline becomes integrated into the mind, wealth-aligned actions no longer require motivation. They flow naturally from internal commitment. This shift transforms effort into habit, and habit into momentum. The psychology of wealth is also influenced by optimism. Not blind, unrealistic optimism, but grounded expectation that effort leads to progress. Optimism acts as a psychological fuel, sustaining perseverance during slow periods and reinforcing belief when challenges arise. Without optimism, the mind concludes prematurely that change is impossible. With optimism, the mind remains open to solutions, maintains clarity, and continues acting with purpose. This positive expectancy becomes a psychological magnet for opportunities because a person who believes in possibility notices possibilities, while a person who expects failure notices obstacles. The external world reflects the internal state. Lastly, the psychology of wealth is shaped by the ability to shift from reaction to creation. When a person reacts to life, they remain in survival mode,
controlled by circumstances rather than shaping them. But when they shift into creation mode, they begin designing their future intentionally. They make choices aligned with their goals, not their fears. They seek knowledge, not comfort. They cultivate consistency, not impulsivity. This shift from reaction to creation is the psychological core of wealth. It transforms a person from a passive observer of their life into an active builder of it. As this chapter concludes, the profound truth emerges that wealth is not first a financial journey, but a psychological one. The mind shapes perception, focus, emotion, identity, and action, and these elements shape results. When the psychology aligns with growth, resilience, clarity, and belief, wealth becomes a natural outcome of the inner transformation. The journey toward abundance begins with the thoughts that guide it, and once the mind shifts, the path becomes clearer, stronger, and more powerful. Wealth is built inwardly long before it appears outwardly, and the psychological foundation created today becomes the reality lived tomorrow.
Chapter 6. The Discipline of Consistent Action. Wealth is often imagined as the result of breakthrough moments, sudden opportunities, or dramatic changes in fortune. Yet the truth is far simpler and far more powerful. Wealth is the product of consistent action, repeated quietly over time. It grows not from explosive bursts of effort, but from the steady rhythm of disciplined choices that compound day after day. Many people underestimate the quiet force of consistency because it does not offer instant gratification. It does not provide the thrill of sudden success or the excitement of dramatic transformation. Instead, it builds silently, often unnoticed, until the results become impossible to ignore. At the heart of every long-term success is the discipline to keep moving forward even when motivation fades, results are slow, and challenges arise. Discipline is the bridge between desire and achievement, between intention and reality, and without it, even the most powerful mindset cannot create lasting change. Discipline does not depend on mood, emotion, or inspiration. These elements fluctuate naturally, rising and falling with life's events, energy levels, and external circumstances. A person who relies on motivation will only act when they feel inspired, which means their progress will be inconsistent, unstable, and easily disrupted. But a person grounded in discipline acts regardless of how they feel. They understand that their future depends on what they consistently choose to do today, not on the temporary waves of emotion that pass through the mind. Discipline is not about harsh rigidity or self-punishment. It is a form of self-respect, the recognition that one's future matters enough to be protected from the impulses and distractions of the present moment. When a person embraces discipline as a core part of their identity, consistency becomes natural. They no longer negotiate with themselves, they simply act, and this steady action creates momentum that grows more powerful over time. The discipline of consistent action also requires clarity. A person cannot be consistent when their goals are vague or their direction uncertain. Clarity gives discipline purpose, transforming effort into progress. Without clarity, discipline feels like empty routine. But with clarity, every action feels meaningful. A clear vision pulls a person forward, even in moments of doubt or fatigue. It becomes the compass that guides daily behavior, allowing a person to filter out distractions that do not align with their goals. Clarity strengthens discipline because it gives the mind something concrete to commit to. When the future is clearly defined, the present becomes easier to navigate, and consistency becomes a natural extension of intention.
Another aspect of disciplined action is the ability to break emotional patterns that sabotage progress.
Many people lose consistency not because they are incapable, but because they react impulsively to emotions such as frustration, boredom, impatience, or self-doubt. They abandon routines when progress feels slow, overlook small wins because they seem insignificant, or revert to old habits when discomfort arises. But consistent action requires emotional stability, the ability to remain steady despite emotional turbulence. This stability does not mean suppressing emotions, it means acknowledging them without obeying them. It means recognizing that frustration does not indicate failure, that boredom does not signal a lack of progress, and that discomfort is often proof of growth. Discipline protects progress from the instability of emotion, allowing the mind to prioritize long-term outcomes over short-term feelings. The discipline of consistency is also shaped by environment. A person's surroundings influence their habits more deeply than they often realize. Environments filled with distractions, negativity, or lack of structure make consistent action difficult, even for someone with strong intention. But environments aligned with growth, clean spaces, supportive people, productive routines, make disciplined action easier. Consistency flourishes in environments that reinforce good habits and minimize temptations that derail progress. This does not require dramatic changes. Even small adjustments in environment can significantly increase discipline. Over time, the environment itself becomes a silent partner in success, supporting consistent action without requiring conscious effort. One of the most overlooked elements of disciplined action is the power of small steps. Many people underestimate the impact of small daily actions because they appear insignificant on their own. They believe progress must be dramatic to be meaningful. This belief sabotages consistency because dramatic action is not sustainable. A person may begin with intense effort, but intensity burns out quickly. What remains is the need for steady, manageable steps, the kind that accumulate gradually. Small steps, repeated consistently, compound in ways the mind cannot easily calculate. A single habit, practiced daily, can transform identity, build skills, strengthen discipline, and generate long-term results. The psychology of consistency recognizes that progress is rarely explosive, it is cumulative. Wealth grows from the quiet, steady accumulation of actions that align with purpose.
Discipline also requires the ability to recover quickly from setbacks. Many people see disruption as failure. Missing a day, breaking a habit, or making a mistake often leads them to give up entirely. They believe consistency demands perfection, but perfection is unrealistic and unsustainable. True discipline is not about never falling, it is about rising quickly. A person disciplined in consistency does not dwell on small setbacks. They simply return to their path with clarity and determination. They understand that the power of consistent action lies not in flawless execution, but in unwavering return. Each recommitment strengthens identity, proving to the mind that progress is always possible, even after disruption. This resilience becomes one of the most important components of disciplined living. Another pillar of consistency is long-term thinking. People who think short-term make decisions based on immediate comfort, and comfort rarely aligns with growth. Long-term thinkers, however, base their decisions on future impact rather than present emotion. They understand that consistency requires patience, and patience requires vision. When the mind is anchored in a long-term perspective, temporary discomfort loses its power. Moments of slow progress no longer feel discouraging because they are understood as part of the journey. Long-term thinking transforms consistency from a struggle into a natural expression of purpose. It allows a person to embrace the process, trusting that every action, no matter how small, contributes to the outcome they seek. Discipline is also strengthened by understanding the cost of inconsistency. Every choice has a consequence, not only in action, but in identity. When a person breaks their commitments repeatedly, the mind begins to believe they are unreliable, incapable, or weak. This internal narrative erodes confidence and perpetuates inconsistency. But when a person honors their commitments, even in small ways, the mind begins to trust itself. Confidence grows from evidence, evidence of discipline, evidence of action, evidence of persistence. Each consistent choice provides proof that the person is becoming someone strong, intentional, and capable. This psychological reinforcement deepens discipline, making it easier to maintain over time.
The discipline of consistent action is not limited to financial activities. It extends to every aspect of life: health, relationships, learning, habits, time management, and emotional regulation. These areas may seem unrelated to wealth, yet they form the foundation upon which wealth is built. A person who cannot manage their emotions will struggle to manage money. A person who lacks discipline in daily habits will struggle to maintain financial routines. A person who procrastinates in personal responsibilities will procrastinate in financial ones. Consistency in one area strengthens consistency in others. The mind does not separate disciplines, it integrates them. Thus, every area of life becomes training for wealth. One of the most powerful aspects of disciplined consistency is how it transforms identity. At first, discipline may feel forced, uncomfortable, or unnatural. But over time, repeated action creates familiarity, and familiarity shapes identity. A person who consistently learns becomes a learner. A person who consistently saves becomes a saver. A person who consistently invests becomes an investor. A person who consistently works on themselves becomes someone committed to growth. Identity is not what a person believes about themselves. It is what they repeatedly prove through action. Consistency rewires identity by building undeniable evidence of who a person is becoming. And this identity then reinforces further consistency, creating a self-sustaining loop of growth. Discipline is also deeply connected to purpose. When a person understands why they are pursuing wealth, not for status, not for comparison, but for freedom, stability, contribution, or personal growth, discipline becomes meaningful. Purpose transforms consistency from obligation into devotion. It strengthens resilience, sharpens focus, and deepens commitment. People who lack purpose often abandon their goals easily because they have no internal anchor. But people with purpose remain consistent even when progress is slow because their discipline is rooted in something deeper than desire. It is rooted in meaning.
As this chapter concludes, one truth becomes undeniable. Wealth is not built in occasional moments of brilliance, but in the disciplined consistency of ordinary days. It grows through the daily decisions that align with purpose, the steady habits that accumulate over time, and the emotional resilience that keeps a person committed even when the journey feels challenging. Consistent action is the quiet force behind every transformative life. It is not dramatic, but it is powerful. Not glamorous, but essential. Not loud, but unstoppable. When a person embraces the discipline of consistent action, they step into a life shaped not by chance, but by intention. And once consistency becomes a way of being, the path to wealth becomes not only possible, but inevitable.
Chapter 7. The Art of Long-Term Vision. Long-term vision is the quiet compass of every wealthy life, the inner lifehouse that guides decisions, shapes priorities, and anchors persistence even when the journey becomes difficult. Many people move through life reacting to circumstances, trapped in short-term thinking that keeps them focused on immediate comfort rather than future possibility. They chase quick solutions, fast results, and temporary relief, never realizing that their inability to think beyond the present is the very reason they remain stuck. Wealth, however, is never the product of short-term thinking. It is built on choices made with the future in mind, choices grounded in clarity, purpose, patience, and the unwavering belief that the life one is constructing is worth the time it takes to build. The art of long-term vision is not simply about setting goals. It is about adopting a mindset that sees beyond the horizon and acts today in alignment with tomorrow's potential. A person without long-term vision lives in constant conflict, pulled between desires, impulses, fears, and temporary emotions. Their decisions shift with their mood. Their direction changes with external pressure. They begin projects with excitement, only to abandon them when the initial motivation fades. They expect rapid results and interpret every delay as failure. This restless way of living prevents them from building anything meaningful or lasting. Without a clear vision of the future, they cannot commit fully to the present. They drift, hoping that something external will eventually create the life they want, not realizing that the absence of vision is the very force preventing its creation. Vision is the foundation upon which consistency, discipline, and resilience stand. Without it, all effort becomes fragmented. Long-term vision, however, provides a sense of direction that does not depend on external validation. It is a deeply personal understanding of what one seeks to become, create, and contribute. It is not a fantasy or a vague aspiration, but a compelling inner picture of the future that gives meaning to every action taken today. When a person carries a powerful vision, they become more intentional with their time, more selective with their choices, and more resilient when faced with challenges. Vision expands their patience because they understand that meaningful outcomes require time. It strengthens their discipline because they know what their effort is leading toward. It deepens their identity because they begin to see themselves not as who they are now, but as who they are becoming. In this way, vision becomes both a map and a mirror, a guide to the path ahead, and a reflection of potential within.
The art of long-term vision also reshapes the mind's relationship with time. Most people underestimate what they can achieve in a decade and overestimate what they can achieve in a week. This imbalance creates frustration, disappointment, and unrealistic expectations that sabotage progress. But a long-term thinker understands that time is not an enemy, but a powerful ally. They recognize that small, consistent actions compound in ways that the mind cannot easily see in the beginning. They understand that early progress is always slow, not because growth is impossible, but because foundations take time to build. Like a seed growing underground before it breaks the surface, progress often happens invisibly long before it becomes visible. Long-term vision teaches the mind to trust the process, allowing the person to move steadily forward even when results seem distant. Another key element of long-term vision is the ability to distinguish between urgency and importance. Urgency demands immediate attention, but importance shapes the future. People trapped in short-term thinking devote their energy to urgent tasks, problems, distractions, obligations, while neglecting the important foundations that would change their lives. They are constantly busy but rarely moving closer to their dreams. A person with long-term vision, however, anchors their life around what truly matters. They prioritize actions that contribute to growth rather than simply reacting to the pressures of the moment. They build their days intentionally, ensuring that each day includes something, even something small, that moves them closer to their long-term destination. Over time, this prioritization separates those who achieve their visions from those who only dream of them. Long-term vision also requires emotional resilience. The future cannot be built without encountering obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. People who lack long-term thinking often abandon their goals at the first sign of difficulty, interpreting challenges as signs that their vision is unrealistic. They forget that every meaningful journey requires overcoming resistance. A wealth-oriented mindset interprets obstacles differently. It sees them as part of the process, not deviations from it. Challenges become evidence of progress, signals that one is moving beyond old limitations and stepping into new territory. Long-term vision transforms adversity into motivation because the destination remains vivid even when the path becomes difficult. This emotional resilience becomes a defining feature of wealthy thinkers, enabling them to persist long after others have given up.
The art of long-term vision also influences identity. A person's vision shapes how they speak to themselves, what they believe they are capable of, and what standards they hold themselves to. When someone envisions a powerful future, their identity begins to evolve in alignment with that future. They start to adopt behaviors that match the person they want to become. They raise their standards, refine their habits, and elevate their expectations. Their decisions reflect the future rather than the past. This transformation is gradual but profound. Over time, the gap between who they are and who they envision themselves becoming begins to close. Identity and vision begin to merge, creating a powerful internal alignment that drives consistent action and long-term success. A strong long-term vision also sharpens decision-making. People without a clear vision make decisions based on emotion, impulse, comparison, or convenience. They choose what is easy rather than what is aligned. But someone with long-term vision evaluates decisions through a different lens. Will this action bring me closer to the future I want, or farther from it? Does this choice support the person I am becoming, or does it reinforce past limitations? When decisions are filtered through the lens of vision, clarity emerges. The person becomes less vulnerable to distraction, temptation, or social pressure because they are anchored in something deeper than momentary desire. This clarity protects them from self-sabotage and ensures that their energy is invested in choices that matter. Long-term vision also transforms the way a person responds to success. Short-term thinkers often rush to celebrate small achievements as final victories, or conversely, dismiss them as insignificant. They oscillate between inflated expectations and discouragement. Long-term vision creates balance. It allows a person to appreciate milestones without becoming complacent. It helps them celebrate progress without losing sight of the larger journey. Vision provides emotional stability, preventing the dramatic highs and lows that derail momentum. The person becomes grounded, steady, and committed. They understand that success is not a moment, but a process, and every step forward is part of something larger.
Yet perhaps the most profound aspect of long-term vision is how it cultivates meaning. People often pursue wealth for status, comparison, or external validation, but these forms of motivation are fragile. They crumble under pressure because they lack depth. Meaning, however, is a powerful force. When wealth is connected to purpose, freedom, contribution, legacy, stability, creativity, or self-actualization, it becomes a source of fulfillment rather than stress. Vision gives wealth a deeper context. It transforms the pursuit of money into a pursuit of growth, impact, and self-transformation. When wealth is rooted in meaning, the journey becomes richer, more resilient, and far more rewarding. Long-term vision is not something a person finds, it is something they build. It grows through reflection, curiosity, learning, and the willingness to imagine a life that transcends current circumstances.
It is crafted through questions such as, who do I want to become? What kind of life do I want to create? What will matter to me 5 years from now? 10 years? What contribution do I want to make to the world? These questions shape the mind, stretch imagination, and illuminate pathways that once seemed invisible. Vision expands gradually, becoming clearer as the person moves forward. It is a living force, continuously refined by new experiences, new insights, and new levels of self-awareness. As this chapter concludes, one truth rises above all others. Long-term vision is the foundation of the wealth mindset. Without it, discipline has no direction, consistency has no purpose, and growth has no anchor. But with it, every action becomes meaningful, every challenge becomes manageable, and every step becomes part of a larger journey. Long-term vision transforms the ordinary moments of life into building blocks of a powerful future. It allows a person to live not just for today, but for the life they are actively creating. When vision becomes clear, the path to wealth becomes not only visible, but deeply inspiring. And once a person learns to see beyond the present, they step into a world where possibility expands, potential awakens, and the future becomes something they shape deliberately, confidently, and with unshakable purpose.
Chapter 8. Emotional Intelligence and Wealth. Wealth is often discussed in terms of numbers, strategies, markets, and opportunities. Yet beneath all these external factors lies a far more powerful and often invisible force: emotional intelligence. This inner capacity, the ability to understand, manage, and channel emotions, determines how a person responds to challenges, how they make decisions, how they interact with others, and how they navigate the complex psychological landscape of success. Money itself is neutral, but the emotions surrounding it are not. Fear, excitement, frustration, impatience, doubt, desire, and confidence shape financial behavior more strongly than knowledge ever could. A person with emotional intelligence can think clearly when others panic, can stay patient when others rush, and can act with intention rather than impulse. In this way, emotional intelligence becomes one of the greatest predictors of wealth, not because it controls external circumstances, but because it shapes the inner state from which all decisions flow. Money carries emotional weight for many reasons. For some, it symbolizes security. For others, freedom. For others still, status or worth. These emotional associations influence financial behavior. Unconsciously, a person who ties their self-worth to money will feel anxious when they lose it, reckless when they gain it, and unstable in both cases. Someone who associates money with fear will avoid opportunities even when they are safe and beneficial. Another who associates money with power may use it irresponsibly. Emotional intelligence allows a person to see these hidden associations clearly, observe their emotional reactions with awareness, and separate their sense of identity from their financial circumstances. This emotional distance does not diminish responsibility. Instead, it empowers clarity. It allows the mind to act with wisdom rather than fear, and to pursue wealth from a place of stability rather than emotional urgency. Emotional intelligence begins with self-awareness, the ability to recognize one's emotional patterns before they control behavior. Many people operate on autopilot, reacting to emotional triggers without understanding their roots. They overspend when stressed, avoid decisions when afraid, or chase risky opportunities when excited. But a person with emotional intelligence learns to observe these impulses with distance. They ask themselves what emotion is driving the decision. They recognize when fear is magnifying a problem, when impatience is pushing them toward shortcuts, and when excitement is clouding judgment. This awareness becomes a powerful shield against impulsive mistakes. It allows the mind to pause, reflect, and choose rather than react. With each moment of awareness, emotional mastery strengthens.
Beyond awareness comes emotional regulation, the ability to remain stable even when emotions rise. Wealth building requires long-term thinking, patience, and discipline, all of which collapse when emotions overpower reason. A person who panics during financial uncertainty may abandon long-term plans. Someone who becomes overwhelmed by doubt may sabotage themselves. Another who reacts impulsively to stress may make decisions that damage their future. Emotional regulation does not eliminate feeling. It gives the person control over how they respond. It allows them to make decisions from a calm, grounded state, even when circumstances are turbulent. This emotional steadiness becomes a competitive advantage because no journey toward wealth is free from difficulty. Those who can remain composed during storms can navigate them with clarity, while others drown in their own emotional waves. Emotional intelligence also shapes how a person deals with failure. Failure is inevitable in any path of growth, but emotional reaction determines whether failure becomes a stepping stone or a stopping point. People who lack emotional intelligence take failure personally. They interpret it as a reflection of their worth or ability. This emotional burden leads them to retreat, abandon efforts, or repeat the same mistakes because fear prevents learning. But those with emotional intelligence understand that failure is information, not identity. They feel the disappointment, but do not allow it to define them. They analyze objectively, learn from the outcome, and adjust their strategies with clarity. This ability to recover quickly from setbacks makes progress continuous, allowing them to maintain momentum even after temporary losses. Emotional resilience becomes one of the strongest pillars supporting the wealth mindset. Another essential component of emotional intelligence is empathy, the ability to understand the emotions of others. Wealth, in its most enduring form, grows through relationships, collaborations, partnerships, and opportunities created with and through people. A person who lacks empathy struggles to build strong connections. They misinterpret others' intentions, communicate poorly, or create unnecessary conflict. But a person with empathy understands others' perspectives, listens deeply, and communicates with intention. They build trust easily because they treat others with respect. They create opportunities by aligning with people's needs and motivations. Empathy strengthens leadership, enhances negotiation, and deepens professional and personal relationships. In the world of wealth, where trust and human connection shape countless opportunities, empathy becomes one of the quiet engines of success.
Emotional intelligence also influences how a person approaches growth. Many individuals resist change because change threatens emotional comfort. They fear stepping into unfamiliar territory because the unknown triggers insecurity. But emotional intelligence allows a person to embrace discomfort without being overwhelmed by it. They recognize that the emotions accompanying growth, anxiety, uncertainty, vulnerability, are natural signals of expansion rather than warnings of danger. They learn to move forward despite emotional resistance, trusting that discomfort is temporary, but progress is lasting. This ability to expand beyond emotional comfort zones opens the door to opportunities that others avoid, allowing the individual to grow faster, adapt more easily, and seize potential others overlook. Another powerful aspect of emotional intelligence is the ability to manage stress. Stress is unavoidable in any serious pursuit, especially the pursuit of wealth, which involves uncertainty, pressure, decision-making, and responsibility. People who lack emotional intelligence crumble under stress or react in ways that harm their progress. They may escape into unhealthy habits, lash out at others, or make impulsive financial choices to relieve pressure. But a person with emotional intelligence approaches stress differently. They understand their boundaries and manage their energy.
They know when to rest and when to push. They interpret stress not as a sign of failure, but as a sign that they are stretching their capacities. Because they respond to stress with clarity, they remain focused and productive even in demanding situations. Over time, stress becomes fuel for growth rather than a barrier to it. Emotional intelligence also plays a central role in building confidence. Confidence is not the absence of doubt, but the ability to move forward despite it. It grows from emotional stability, repeated effort, and the understanding that mistakes do not diminish worth. A person with emotional intelligence builds their confidence gradually through experience, reflection, and self-compassion. They do not demand perfection from themselves, they value progress. They speak to themselves with encouragement rather than self-criticism. They understand that inner strength is cultivated, not inherited. This stable confidence becomes essential in navigating opportunities, taking calculated risks, and making decisions that shape long-term wealth. It becomes the internal anchor that prevents collapse when external circumstances shift.
A lesser-known function of emotional intelligence is its ability to reduce self-sabotage. Many people fail not because they lack skill or opportunity, but because emotional patterns lead them to undermine their own progress. They procrastinate when afraid. They avoid success when it triggers feelings of unworthiness. They abandon routines when emotional discomfort arises. Emotional intelligence reveals these patterns clearly. It shines a light on the emotional roots of sabotage and gives the person the tools to respond consciously rather than unconsciously. Once sabotaging patterns are recognized, they can be replaced with intentional actions rooted in clarity and purpose. This shift frees the person from cycles that may have held them back for years. Finally, emotional intelligence deepens fulfillment. Wealth without emotional intelligence often leads to stress, burnout, emptiness, or conflict. But wealth built with emotional awareness becomes meaningful and sustainable. It supports a life grounded in purpose, balance, and connection. It allows the person to enjoy their journey, appreciate their progress, and experience gratitude rather than constant comparison. Emotional intelligence enriches the internal experience of wealth, ensuring that abundance is not only financial, but emotional, psychological, and relational. As this chapter comes to a close, one truth becomes clear. Emotional intelligence is not optional in the pursuit of wealth, it is essential. It shapes how a person thinks, feels, decides, and grows. It determines how they handle pressure, interact with others, and recover from setbacks. It transforms wealth from a financial goal into a holistic journey of personal evolution. When emotional intelligence strengthens, so too do clarity, resilience, confidence, and purpose. Wealth begins in the mind, but it is sustained in the emotions. And when the mind and emotions align, the path to abundance becomes not only achievable, but deeply transformative.
Chapter 9. The Wealth Ecosystem. Building an environment that supports growth. Every human being lives inside an invisible ecosystem, a network of habits, relationships, routines, thoughts, surroundings, and influences that shape their behavior more powerfully than willpower alone ever could. Many people believe that success is solely the result of personal effort, discipline, and ambition. Yet countless examples throughout history show that even the most determined individual can struggle when their environment works against them. Likewise, someone with moderate discipline and average ambition can flourish when their environment reinforces growth, clarity, and long-term thinking. Wealth is not created in isolation. It is nurtured by the ecosystem that surrounds a person every day. This ecosystem can either elevate them or drain them, expand their potential or limit it, strengthen their identity or weaken it. Understanding and shaping this environment becomes a critical part of building a lasting wealth mindset. The first layer of the wealth ecosystem is the physical environment, the spaces where a person spends their time, These spaces have a powerful psychological effect, influencing energy, clarity, focus, and emotional stability. A cluttered, chaotic space often creates a cluttered mind. A space filled with distractions encourages avoidance and inconsistency. A space that lacks order can quietly drain motivation. Yet a clean, organized environment can sharpen focus, reduce stress, and increase productivity without any extra effort. Even minor changes, such as removing unnecessary clutter or designing a workspace dedicated to growth, can create a noticeable shift in momentum. The mind responds to the environment automatically, and a person seeking wealth must learn to surround themselves with spaces that elevate their state rather than weaken it. A supportive environment does not force effort. It reduces the friction required to take action. Beyond the physical environment lies the psychological environment, the mental atmosphere created through daily habits, internal dialogue, and emotional patterns. Habits form the invisible structure of daily life, influencing how time is used, how energy is managed, and how decisions are made. Some habits drain potential, waking up without purpose, consuming negativity, avoiding responsibilities, or delaying important tasks. Other habits enhance potential, reading, planning, learning, reflecting, acting with intention, and regulating emotion. A person's psychological environment determines the rhythm of their life. When that rhythm aligns with growth, wealth becomes a natural outcome. But when it aligns with avoidance or chaos, progress becomes unstable. Transforming this environment requires awareness and repetition. Each intentional habit, no matter how small, becomes a building block of a stronger internal world. The wealth mindset grows strongest when the mind is trained daily, not through dramatic changes, but through steady, persistent alignment.
Another profound part of the wealth ecosystem is the social environment, the people who surround an individual. Human beings absorb the beliefs, behaviors, and expectations of their social circles unconsciously. If a person spends time with individuals who fear risk, complain endlessly, avoid growth, or criticize ambition, these attitudes will seep into their thinking no matter how determined they are. Negativity spreads easily. Limitation spreads quietly. But the opposite is also true. When a person surrounds themselves with individuals who think big, pursue growth, embrace challenges, and encourage discipline, their mindset naturally expands. The mind normalizes what it repeatedly sees, and when success becomes normalized, the person begins to believe in their own potential more deeply. This does not mean abandoning relationships, but expanding them, intentionally seeking environments where ambition is celebrated rather than condemned. The people one chooses to spend time with will shape the direction of their life more deeply than they often realize. The wealth ecosystem also includes informational input, the ideas, messages, and knowledge a person consumes each day. Information is food for the mind. Negative information weakens it. Empowering information strengthens it. Many people consume an endless stream of entertainment, gossip, complaints, or sensationalized media that fills the mind with fear, distraction, or confusion. These inputs subtly shape beliefs about what is possible. But when a person intentionally consumes knowledge that elevates, educates, and inspires, books, courses, meaningful conversations, thoughtful analysis, the mind begins to shift. It becomes clearer, stronger, more capable of strategic thinking. Over time, the information one consumes becomes the foundation of their worldview. A wealth mindset requires feeding the mind with ideas that support ambition rather than undermine it. The mind cannot think beyond the quality of its input. Another essential part of the wealth ecosystem is the emotional environment, the inner climate shaped by how a person handles pressure, uncertainty, and personal expectations. Emotional stability is not only a skill, but an atmosphere the person lives within.
Some individuals create emotional environments filled with self-criticism, impatience, or unresolved stress, which becomes a barrier to consistent action. Others create environments filled with compassion, patience, and self-encouragement, allowing them to recover quickly from setbacks and maintain long-term focus. This emotional climate is shaped through reflection, mindfulness, rest, boundaries, and intentional emotional habits. Wealth does not flourish in a mind overwhelmed by emotional chaos. It grows in a mind that can remain steady through turbulence, grounded through challenge, and centered through change. A person who builds an emotionally stable inner world becomes far more capable of handling the demands of wealth creation.
The wealth ecosystem also includes the strategic environment, the systems, routines, and structures that support financial growth. Many people fail not because they lack ability, but because their life lacks structure. They rely on willpower alone, attempting to build wealth through spontaneous effort rather than intentional systems. But wealth thrives on systems, routines for saving, structures for investing, schedules for learning, methods for planning, and frameworks for decision-making. Systems remove uncertainty. They transform intention into habit and habit into results. When systems are strong, consistency becomes easier. When systems are absent, progress becomes unpredictable. The strategic environment is built gradually through intentional design, reflection, and adjustment. It becomes the backbone of long-term financial growth. Another key part of the wealth ecosystem is the energy environment, the physical and mental vitality that fuels action. Wealth requires effort, clarity, and resilience, all of which depend on energy. A person who lacks energy struggles to stay disciplined, struggles to think clearly, and struggles to maintain long-term momentum. Energy is shaped by sleep, nutrition, activity levels, rest, and emotional boundaries. When these elements are neglected, the mind becomes exhausted and decisions weaken. But when they are nurtured, the mind becomes sharp, focused, and capable of sustained effort. Energy is not merely physical, it is deeply connected to emotional and psychological well-being. A person building the wealth mindset must protect their energy as carefully as they protect their time. The wealth ecosystem also involves the future environment, the vision a person holds of their future self. This vision shapes choices in the present. If a person envisions a future filled with limitation, they will act accordingly. If they envision a future of growth, stability, freedom, or contribution, their current actions will align with that vision. The future environment becomes a mental destination that guides the direction of life. It strengthens discipline, reduces confusion, and accelerates progress. When the future is clear, the present becomes meaningful. When the future is unclear, the present becomes scattered. The wealth mindset requires building a future environment so compelling that it pulls the person forward even through moments of difficulty. Perhaps the most transformative part of the wealth ecosystem is self-expectation, the internal standard a person sets for themselves. People rise or fall to the level of their expectations. If someone expects only survival, they will make decisions that maintain survival. If they expect growth, they will act in ways that create growth. If they expect excellence, they will pursue excellence. Self-expectation becomes the silent architect of behavior. It determines what a person accepts from themselves and what they refuse to tolerate. A person with high self-expectation cultivates environments that support their vision. They remove distractions, strengthen habits, elevate relationships, and make decisions aligned with their future. They hold themselves accountable not through harshness, but through purpose. High expectation creates high identity, and high identity creates powerful outcomes. As this chapter comes to its conclusion, one truth becomes evident.
Wealth is not created by the individual alone, but by the ecosystem they build around themselves. This ecosystem supports their mindset, their habits, their decisions, and their long-term goals. It becomes the invisible ally that strengthens discipline, magnifies clarity, protects energy, and accelerates growth. A person may have extraordinary potential, but without a supportive ecosystem, that potential remains dormant. Yet even someone with modest potential can achieve extraordinary results when their environment aligns with their ambition. The wealth ecosystem is not something one waits for. It is something one designs. And once this ecosystem is built intentionally, it becomes a living force, shaping behavior naturally, guiding decisions effortlessly, and creating a foundation upon which long-term wealth can flourish. When environment and intention align, the path to abundance becomes not only possible, but inevitable.
Chapter 10. Mastering Decision-Making, Choices that Shape Destiny. Every life is shaped by a series of decisions, some small and subtle, others large and transformative. Yet few people recognize the profound power these decisions hold. Wealth is not created through one dramatic leap, but through countless choices made with intention, clarity, and long-term thinking. Every decision is a fork in the road, a quiet force pushing the person toward growth or keeping them anchored in limitation. Yet many individuals underestimate the weight of their choices, believing that their circumstances, opportunities, or luck have a greater influence than the decisions they make each day. The truth is that decisions are destiny. They sculpt identity, define habits, determine direction, and create the foundation upon which wealth is built. Mastering decision-making is therefore not a luxury, but a requirement for anyone seeking to create a powerful, wealthy life. One of the most significant challenges of decision-making is the mind's natural resistance to uncertainty. Human beings are wired for safety, drawn instinctively toward the familiar, even when the familiar keeps them stagnant. Uncertainty feels risky, uncomfortable, and unpredictable, and this discomfort leads many people to delay decisions, avoid opportunities, and remain trapped in indecision. But wealthy thinkers understand something essential. Every meaningful decision requires stepping into uncertainty. Growth cannot emerge from the comfort zone, and clarity rarely appears fully formed before action begins. Mastering decision-making means learning to move forward even when the path is not perfectly visible. It means trusting one's ability to learn, adapt, and navigate challenges rather than waiting for perfect conditions that never arrive. Another powerful aspect of decision-making involves the mind's relationship with fear. Fear clouds judgment, magnifies potential losses, and minimizes potential gains. It convinces a person that avoiding a decision is safer than making one, even though avoidance is itself a decision, often the wrong one. Fear leads to opportunities missed, ideas untested, and potential unrealized. But wealth requires the ability to feel fear without obeying it. Fear will always appear during moments of growth, but emotional intelligence allows a person to observe fear rather than surrender to it. Instead of asking, "What could go wrong?" the wealth mindset asks, "What could grow from this?" This shift in internal dialogue transforms fear into information, revealing where courage is required and where breakthrough is possible.
Decision-making also depends on clarity, not only about goals, but about personal values. Without clarity, decisions become reactive, shaped by emotion or pressure rather than intention. A person who does not know what matters most will be easily influenced by the expectations of others, the lure of distraction, or the noise of comparison. They may pursue paths that lead them away from fulfillment because they're following momentum rather than direction. But a person with clear values, growth, freedom, discipline, purpose, navigates decisions with confidence,
They know what aligns with their future and what does not. They evaluate choices not based on immediate emotion, but on long-term meaning. Clarity simplifies decision-making because it eliminates confusion. When values are clear, the right decisions become more visible. Another essential part of mastering decision-making is understanding the difference between intuition and impulse. Intuition is grounded in wisdom, the subtle voice shaped by experience, awareness, and subconscious intelligence. Impulse, on the other hand, is driven by temporary emotion, excitement, fear, impatience, or desire. Many people confuse the two, mistaking emotional urgency for intuitive insight. This confusion leads to impulsive decisions that sabotage long-term progress. But intuition feels different, calm, steady, quietly confident. It does not rush or pressure, it guides. A person who learns to distinguish intuition from impulse gains a powerful internal compass that supports wise decision-making. Over time, this skill becomes one of the strongest assets in the pursuit of wealth because it minimizes errors and strengthens alignment. Decision-making also involves the ability to evaluate consequences, not only in terms of what will change, but in terms of what will remain the same if no decision is made. Many individuals stay stuck because they only assess the risks of taking action, ignoring the risks of inaction. But the risk of inaction is often far greater. Dreams fade, opportunities disappear, skills stagnate. Life moves forward even when a person does not. Mastering decision-making means recognizing that the cost of staying the same can be higher than the cost of trying something new. When the mind evaluates both sides of the equation, action versus inaction, decisions become clearer and more courageous.
Another critical element of decision-making is learning to act without perfection. Perfectionism paralyzes progress. It convinces a person that they must know everything before they begin, that every detail must be flawless, and that mistakes are unacceptable. This mindset creates endless hesitation, preventing action for months or years. But wealthy thinkers understand that perfection is impossible and unnecessary. Progress begins with imperfect action, refined through feedback, learning, and adjustment. The best decisions are often made with incomplete information, because experience will always teach more than planning. Mastering decision-making means embracing imperfection, acting when ready enough, and trusting that clarity often grows after the decision is made, not before. Confidence is another essential component of decision-making. Confidence is not about certainty. It is about trust. Trust in one's ability to adapt, to learn, to recover, and to move forward. People often believe confidence must come before action, but in reality, confidence is built through action. Each decision, each step forward, each moment of courage strengthens identity. The person begins to trust themselves more deeply, creating a cycle where decisions grow easier because the mind has evidence of resilience. Confidence shapes decision-making by reducing hesitation, diminishing fear, and increasing clarity. It becomes a quiet, internal foundation that supports growth. The ability to decide quickly yet thoughtfully is another trait of wealthy thinkers. Quick decisions are not rushed decisions. They are decisions made without prolonged doubt, fear, or overthinking. Many people lose opportunities because they wait too long, trapped in analysis, searching endlessly for reassurance or certainty. But in the world of wealth, opportunities flow toward those who act with intention and confidence. Quick decisions require preparation. The mind must be trained to recognize what aligns with the vision and what does not. When values, goals, and intuition are clear, decisions can be made swiftly without sacrificing quality. This speed becomes a strategic advantage, allowing the person to seize opportunities others hesitate to pursue. Decision-making also involves responsibility. the willingness to own the results of one's choices. Many people avoid decisions because they fear accountability. They prefer to let circumstances decide for them so they can avoid blame. But this avoidance strips them of power. Wealth begins when a person takes full responsibility for their decisions, both successes and failures. Responsibility does not mean self-criticism. It means recognizing that every choice is a step toward becoming the person one chooses to be. When responsibility becomes part of identity, decision-making becomes more intentional and empowered. Another dimension of mastering decision-making lies in evaluating whether a decision is aligned with identity or driven by ego. Ego seeks approval, validation, recognition, or superiority. Identity seeks authenticity, growth, purpose, and alignment. Decisions driven by ego often lead to regret because they ignore the deeper needs of the individual. But decisions aligned with identity strengthen self-respect and long-term fulfillment. This alignment requires honesty, the willingness to examine motives and choose the path that reflects the highest version of oneself rather than the most convenient or impressive one. Finally, mastering decision-making involves understanding that decisions accumulate. One good decision rarely changes a life. Hundreds of aligned decisions do. Each decision becomes a brick in the foundation of wealth, a foundation built gradually, intentionally, and consistently. Decisions shape habits, habits shape identity, identity shapes action, and action shapes destiny. Over time, a person who consistently makes intentional decisions becomes unstoppable. Their life begins to reflect the clarity, courage, and discipline behind their choices. As this chapter comes to a close, one truth becomes fully clear. Decisions are the architects of the future. They form the invisible lines upon which a wealthy life is drawn. When a person masters decision-making, when they learn to choose with clarity, act with confidence, embrace uncertainty, and trust themselves, they gain control over their destiny. Wealth is not an accident. It is a series of intentional decisions made with purpose and courage. And once a person understands the power of their choices, they step into a life shaped not by chance, fear, or hesitation, but by wisdom, intention, and unshakable belief in their ability to create the future they envision.